you're ready, please go ahead.
Oh, yep. Here we
Can
go.
you see my slides well?
Yes.
Yep.
Awesome. So, hi, I'm Elaine Rhee. I am a PhD student at University of Arizona. I had to put this slide together at the last moment. I didn't really know that I was going to present today, so please bear with me. So the paper that I'm going to present is gender difference in competitive behavior history dependent? I have 4 research questions. One is whether fairness history with a competitor explains the willingness to enter a tournament at an individual level. So for an example, if someone was unfair to me, does that make me want to compete with that person more? Or if that person was fair to me, does that mean I want to compete less with that person? The second question is whether fairness intentions matter. So when that person was unfair to me on purpose, does that make me want to compete with that person more? If that unfair outcome happened just by accident, does that not affect my competitive behavior at all? That is the second question. The third question is whether emotions affect one's competitiveness. So if an unfair event happens and that makes me angry or disgust or anything, does any of these certain emotions make me want to enter competitions more? The last question is there a gender difference in each of these 3 questions? So why is this important? Well, competition is everywhere. Sports, election, labor markets. If you look around, it's all about competitions. And contestants do often have interactions with each other. So the thing that I'm going to do in this paper, first of all, is study how fair or unfair history caused by a competitor influences one's winner-take-all tournament entry decision. So if we look at fairness models like inequity aversion, these models can predict that people would enter tournament after an unfair event to even out the distributive consequences. On the other hand, the reciprocity models, they do have the same prediction in the way that people will enter tournament after an unfair event, but the motivation is different. This time it's because they want to punish the competitor who caused the unfair event. The second thing I'm going to study in this paper is, does intention of the fair or unfair history matter? In the inequity aversion models, well, only distributive consequences matter, so intentions don't really have a major role in decision making. In reciprocity models, however, fairness intentions have a major behavioral role, so intentions will matter according to these models. In experiments, we find evidence that support both approaches. So I'm going to see, when it comes to competitive behavior, does intention matter or not? Another thing is I'm going to see how emotions is going to affect competitive behavior. So far, there are many studies that have shown that emotions affects one's behavior, like Nguyen and Nozier. They say that fear, happiness, anger, and surprise is positively correlated with risk aversion. Lerner and Keltner, they say that fear leads to pessimistic risk assessments and anger to optimistic ones. So this time now it's like competitive behavior's turn. Let's see how emotions are affecting those competitiveness. Another thing, I'm hoping to give a new perspective on the labor market outcome. We have seen a lot of examples today that women are not really well represented in the market. Like in this case, in the US, women only account for 2.5% of the 5 highest paid executives. Well, to explain this in a competitive behavior way, there is Netherland Westerland that say women shy away from competition more than men do, and this might be a reason why they are not really represented well. So what I'm going to do in this study is then, well, if women don't compete as much as men do, is that because unfair history or like something happened before is affecting their competitiveness? And does unfair history or whatever happened before is affecting one's performance even when they decide to compete? So here is a preview of my results. Unfair history with intentions matter. So both men and women enter tournaments more when the competitor was unfair by choice. Men react more sensitively than women do. So men, like if your competitor was unfair to you by choice, then they really want to compete with that competitor. Women do, but not as much as men do. And this gender gap can be partially explained by emotions, which I'll show later. Unfair history without intentions did not really matter. Both men and women do not enter tournament more when the unfair history happened by accident. So I'm going to explain the experimental design. Monica's experiment is pretty similar to mine, and she explained it very well, so I'm going to try to go a little bit faster over here. There are two treatments in my experiment, the dictator game treatment and the random treatment, and there are 4 parts: practice part A, B, and C. So the part that I'm really interested in is the part A, which I'm going to see how history is affecting the competitive behavior. Part B and C are more for controls. I'm going to look at distributional preferences and risk attitude. So the practice part, this is like literally a practice for the task that they're going to do later, which is based on Netherland, Westerland. The subjects had to do an addition exercise. They had to add up 5 2-digit numbers. They were given 3 minutes. No calculators were allowed, but I gave them scratch papers. They got a feedback on how many questions they got correct at the end of the practice part, but they didn't get any feedback of other participants' performance. And also, this was the only part that I gave feedback on their performance in general. So part A, this is the part that is important. So there was groups that were matched randomly, and in each group there were 2 subjects. One was a dictator and the other one was a scheme chooser. The group were rematched every period, and the role did not change throughout the experiment. So one dictator and one scheme choosers were rematched every period randomly, and they had no idea or like any information of each other at all. Part A was repeated 4 times, and this part A was video recorded so that I could use Face Reader, which is a program that lets me analyze the video so that I can get the emotional states. The 7 emotional states I use over here is neutral, happy, sad, scared, surprised, disgust, and angry. So here's the overview of part A. The camera starts right before the part A started. And in the first stage of part A, there was a dictator minigame. The dictator basically had to grab or share a certain amount of money. And then after that, the scheme choosers, they decided to enter tournament or not. But to do that, I use a strategy method. So on the screen, it just looks like let's say the dictator that is matched with you, like, gave you nothing. What are you gonna do this time? Like, he shared, let's say, then what are you gonna do? After those are done, I finally gave them what the dictator's decision actually was and what the corresponding scheme chooser's decision was, and they had to do the addition exercise. After that, the last stage of part A was to guess each other's performance and their own. So that blue part is repeated 4 times, and then after the 4 times were all repeated, the camera ended. So in the first stage of part A, there was a dictator minigame. Dictators had to choose how to allocate $16 with a matched scheme chooser. So the dictators had only 2 options, either to grab or share. When the dictator grabbed, the dictator had all $16 and left nothing for the scheme chooser. When the dictator shares, then they equally gave $8. So the grab case would be an unfair event to the scheme chooser, and the share case would be the fair event to the scheme chooser. The next stage was to look at the tournament entry decision of the scheme choosers. To do that, I use a strategy method. How I do this is that on a screen, the only thing that shows is the total amount you and the other player had to share is $16. Let's say the other player offered you zero, nothing, and took the whole $16. So they just look at that screen for 20 seconds and express all their emotions like anger or whatever it is. And then they move on to the next screen that allows them to choose tournament mode or peace rate mode. I do the pretty much same thing for this share case. So the screen that the scheme chooser looks at is the total amount you and the other player had to share is $16. Let's say the other player offered you 8.5. They looked at that for 20 seconds and then move on to the next screen that allows them to pick tournament mode or peace rate mode. So peace rate mode and tournament mode, no matter what they choose, it's going to be pretty much the same task-wise, just the payment's different. If it's a tournament, it's winner take all. So the person who gets more questions correct is going to get $2 per correct problem. The loser gets nothing. Whereas in the peace rate, they're going to get $1 per correct problem, and it's an independent payment. The last stage of the part A is to guess their performance and the matched player's performance. And by doing this, I was able to get the overconfidence level and confidence level. So that was all part A. Now we're going to move on to part B. Now I'm going to get the controls that I need. The first thing I'm going to look at is the distributional preferences. So distributional preferences and intentions are...
Elaine?
Yes?
Yeah, can I ask one clarification question?
Of course.
Yeah, so in one particular session, there can be multiple people who chose for peace rate and multiple people who chose for a tournament, right?
Yes.
Now, if there are odd number of people who chose for tournament, how do you match?
If there were odd number of people.
No, suppose just one person chose for tournament. So what do you do in that particular session?
Oh, so if the scheme choosers choose tournament, the match dictator has to play tournament with that scheme chooser.
Oh, okay. Got it. Thanks.
I'm sorry that I didn't make that clear.
No,
So yeah, whatever the scheme chooser chooses, that decision is made for the dictator too. So if the scheme choosers choose to compete, then the dictator automatically is going to play a tournament with the scheme chooser. If the scheme chooser chooses peace rate, then the two of them automatically plays peace rate.
Oh, thanks.
Awesome. So part B, distributional preferences and intentions are determinants of fairness, according to the paper from Belmar. So this is why I control distributional preferences. I'm interested in intentions. To do that, I use Belafauda's, Hirschfammer, and Sutter's method. The scheme choosers are again randomly matched with another dictator. And the scheme choosers were asked to pick one between the binary choices for each task, where the left option was always an asymmetric payoff and the right side was always a symmetric payoff. They had to decide how much to give themselves and the match dictator. So how this looked like is basically like this. The right side is always a symmetric payoff and the left side is always an asymmetric payoff. And looking at when they move to the left is how the Belafauda et al. Paper determines the distributional preference, which I follow exactly the same. So part C is where I look at risk preference. I use two multi-price lists. All participants are asked to pick between the binary choices of each task, where the left was always a for sure payment and the right was a gamble. I use different numerical values for each stage, and the duplicate MPLs are placed in different parts of the experiment to alleviate the tendency for consistency of responses. So I have two MPLs. One looks like this. On the right side is a $12 gamble and the left side is the for sure payment. Another MPL looks like this. The right side $8 gamble and the left side is the for sure payments. So The experiment procedure was basically like this for the dictator game treatment. The scroll means that's the time that I gave them instructions. So I give them the general instructions and quiz them about the general instructions. And after that, the first MPL started. After that, practice part, and then part A was repeated 4 times in the order of dictator game, tournament entry, actually doing the addition exercise, and guessing performances. After 4 times were repeated, the distributional preference part and the last MPL was done, and the experiment ended with a questionnaire. So this is the dictator game treatment. The random treatment is almost the same, except for that part A, stage 1 is different. Instead of the dictator making the decision, the computer randomly decides the decision for the dictator. So in the dictator game treatment, if an unfair event happened, that is by choice of the dictator, whereas in the random treatment, the unfair event is not by choice. It's just the computer's random decision. So this experiment was done in University of Arizona. All parts except for the practice part was incentivized. So here is the summary results. This is the average tournament entry. So if you look over here, in the males case, in the dictator game treatment, when it's an unfair event, males entered tournament 83% of the time, whereas when it was a fair event, only 29%. So like you can see over here, the gap is pretty big. Same to the females. In the dictator game treatment, depending on unfair and fair, the gap exists. Whereas in the random treatment, the gap is not really that significant, both to male and females. If we look at this the other way around to see how intentions matter, unfair event in the male case. So if intentions are there, people and male enter tournaments way more compared to when the intentions does not exist. Also to females, when the unfair event happened by intention, they enter tournament 60% of the time, whereas when the intention does not exist, they enter a little bit more than 35%, around 35%. So here is my regression model. So I use a OR-IV, or obviously related instrument variable, which comes from this paper over here. So I have 2 risk measures because I did 2 MPLs, and I basically use these 2 risk measures for an instrument for each other. So in the regression model I'm showing you over here, I'm using risk 8, the $8 gamble MPL. I'm using this an instrument for the risk 12, which is the risk measure I get from the MPL using $12 gambles. I do this the other way around too, but I get pretty similar results. I'll show you. Over here, I denotes the scheme chooser, J denotes the match dictator, and T denotes the period. YIT is the outcome variable, which is going to be the tournament entry or performance. XIT, this is the control, which includes distributional preference, confidence level, and emotions. MUI, this is the subject random effect. So I do a panel regression using linear probability model. So this is the regression result when I control for distributional preferences, risk attitude, and also confidence level. In the dictator game treatment, unfair history exists over here, as you can see. People enter tournament more on the unfair history compared to fair history. So when a competitor was unfair to you, people just really want to compete with that competitor. In the random treatment, when this unfair history happened by accident, not by choice, we can see that the unfair history, it does not really have a significant effect. So comparing the random and dictator game treatment, we can really see that intentions actually matter.
Elaine, you have
Yes.
10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Also, if we look in the dictator game treatment, there is a gender gap in the unfair history effect. So men have a bigger unfair event effect. So they really jump into competition more when the unfair event was happened by choice of the competitor. Women do, just not as much as men do. In the random treatment, there was no gender gap in general. So now, not only controlling for distributional preferences, risk attitude, and confidence level, now I'm going to control for emotions too and see what's going to happen. So the unfair history effect still exists in the dictator game treatment if you look over here. Men enter tournament 50% point more when the unfair history happened, and women enter 24% more percent point more when the unfair history happened compared to when the fair history happened. Also, the gender gap in unfair history effect still exists in the dictator game treatment. If you look over here, men have a bigger unfair history effect. The gap between the men and women is 21% point. But if you notice that the gender gap decreases as the emotion is controlled. So before the emotions were controlled, the gender gap was about 24% point. And after controlling for it, it decreases to 21% point. So I guess I can say that emotion partially explains this gender gap over here. Another thing is that surprise has a significant effect on the dictator game treatment. If you look over here. So the story behind this that I argue is that people expect others to be nice to them. It's been shown in the Belmar et al. Paper that negative expectation violation can increase the tendency to penalize the violator. So people expect the scheme choosers expect the dictator to share with them. But what happens is the dictator grabs and doesn't share. So this violates their expectation negatively, and this kind of surprises them because they didn't expect this. And because it's negatively violated, they just want to penalize that dictator a lot. If we look at the performance, unfair history definitely does have an effect on performance, especially to females. If it affects women's performance negatively, however, unfair history does not really affect men's performance. Especially women's performance is really affected by unfair history negatively when intention is involved. You can see in the dictator game, this negative coefficient is significant, and the random, it's arguably, but not that strong as in the dictator game treatment. Entering competition has different effects in the treatments. So in the dictator gate treatment, when people enter the competition, no matter the gender, people just do worse. However, in the random treatment, it's a little bit different. Entering competition improves men's performance. However, it harms women's performance. So in conclusion, I do a lab experiment to see how history affects one's competitive behavior. Unfair history makes one want to compete more only when intention is involved. And also there is a gender difference only when intention is involved. Men's behavior is more sensitive to unfair history than women's, but this can be explained by emotions partially. Also, in general, unfair history affects women's performance negatively, but does not affect men's performance. Entering tournaments is not beneficial to women, regardless of history and intention. So what can I say about this is that women may not be well represented in competitive jobs, considering that when a competitor was unfair, unkind to them, then women just don't enter the competition as at the same rate as male competitors and perform worse than men do. So in a broader aspect, if women encounter unfair events like gender discrimination, it can make them compete even less and also perform worse. Like Nederland Westerlin said, women don't enter tournaments as much as men do, but maybe these kind of unfair events can aggravate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think
Thank you, Elaine.
yeah. So you have the time for 2 quick questions. So I think Subo and Stephen has a comment.
If somebody else wants to ask, that's fine.
Oh yeah. So Stephen, would you like to ask her?
Yeah, I was just curious about in your regression tables you had controls for emotion, but just sort of interested in unpacking which emotions seem to explain most of the variance in that male competition entry. Like specifically, was it like anger or?
So I did have a hypothesis that anger was going to be the mediation that is causing people to enter a tournament more under unfair event. However, when I do it, it didn't really show any effect. Actually, I control for all the emotions over here, but only showed surprise because I don't really have space. And just doing a lot of regressions, the only thing that can actually explain this to me is surprised so far.
Ah, okay. That's interesting.
Thank you.
I was also thinking that your design uses a strategy method for what happens after the dictator game, and there's sort of this result in the literature on ultimatum games that the strategy method makes people more quote unquote rational or homo economicus. That is, people are more likely to angrily reject bad offers if they're doing it, with the direct response method rather than if they're considering the strategy method.
Yes.
So that might be sort of something that could be explored. Is that this emotion stuff might be actually muted by the strategy method design.
Yes, absolutely. Well, when I first designed this, I was thinking maybe I should use the direct method, but direct response method, but I was kind of afraid of overestimating the effect. So that's why I just decided to use strategy method. And even then, I kind of have results over here that unfair event really matters. So.
Right.
I'm guessing if I use direct response, maybe this coefficient can be even higher.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting, but of course, direct response, you get half the data, if that.
Yes, true. Yeah, not a lot of people like to share, so I wouldn't really have that many cases of share events. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, can I ask a quick question?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So I have a question and a bit of suggestion. So, do your results stay the same if you pick up only the first period instead of 4?
Almost the same. It's not. I would say it's pretty robust. People didn't really change their decision that much.
Okay, so does not matter. So what I'm saying is, if I start with somebody took all 16 or whatever, and then in the next period something different happens. So do I change my behavior? It's like that. So did you take care of those?
No, not really, because I use strategy method. I didn't really take into account.
No, I
that
understand,
part.
but
Yeah.
people get experience, right?
Yes, yes. I do control for time trend though.
Okay.
Yeah.
You might want to put a lag variable also,
Yeah,
because
yeah, I should.
what if you look at especially for in sabotage literature, here you don't have the option to sabotage, but in sabotage literature, what
Yeah.
you faced before, that makes you sabotage more in the next period. Does not matter who you're matched with.
I see.
Okay, you might be matched with somebody else, but you just put the heat on the other person. Okay.
Okay.
So that might actually have some effect. You can have a look. That's one. And second is, I would be a bit conservative about explaining the results. I think the results are very nice, really nice. But while saying that people would like to fight or people would like to punish, that's why they're entering the tournament. I'll not be very sure, because entering the tournament does not mean punishment or fighting, right? Entering the tournament, you can just only say they're entering the tournament. But if you try to explain it as I would like to fight, that might not be the case. It might only be the case that, well, I lost a lot of money. because and that other person has, and I feel for inequity aversion. So if I can win, that will make both of us equal. That's why I'm entering. So you don't know their reason, right?
Yes,
So
the
might be
two
better to be
reason
conservative.
that yes, the two reason that I explained in the very beginning is that entering tournament to even out the payoffs. So if I win,
Yeah.
I can, yeah, the inequity aversion motivation, and the other one is the reciprocal emotion. Like you were unfair to me, so to punish you, I enter. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Elaine.
Thank
So we are now at the last sort of extra presentation. Thanks for staying on until 2:30. And Zamona, if you are ready, you can go ahead and share your screen.
I hope it
Excellent.
worked. Okay, very good. So